What if the price of love wasn't money? What if it was your life? We've all heard stories about choosing love over riches, right? It's the classic fairy tale. But I'm about to tell you a story from the village of Umuachala that is no fairy tale. It's a story about a young woman who refused a 5 million naira bride price. And what happened next? Well, it didn't just break her family, it broke the entire village. So get comfortable and listen close, because this story has a secret buried in it, one that's darker than you could ever imagine.
Picture this, a hot, dusty morning in Umuachala. The entire village is buzzing, gathered under the ancient Iroko tree, its massive branches like the arms of a silent god. Why? Because today, power and wealth have come to visit. A convoy of sleek black cars, so out of place they look like spaceships, has rolled into the village square, and out of the lead car steps Amaka, the senator's only son. He's arrogant, draped in an agbada as white as bleached bones, and he's not just walking, he's flaunting. His friends are literally spraying money, fresh crisp Naira notes fluttering into the dusty air as the villagers scramble.
This isn't a proposal, it's a declaration of ownership. The price? Amaka. Now, Amaka wasn't just the most beautiful girl in the village. She had a fire in her spirit that everyone saw, but no one could tame. And as she was presented, her family beamed with pride. You could see that fire in her eyes. The senator's son, Amaka, announced the bride price like he was buying the entire village. 5 million naira, cash, and 12 fat cows. Their homes decorated with ribbons. The village held its breath. This wasn't a bride price. It was a king's ransom. It was enough to change her family's life forever. Amaka's father was already weeping with joy. Emeka smirked, confident. He owned her. He owned this day. He owned everything. But then, Amaka took a step forward. The crowd went silent. She walked right up to him, looked him dead in the eye, and with a voice that cut through the entire square, she said 5 words that sealed her fate. "I'm not for sale." You could have heard a feather drop on the other side of the village. For a second, no one moved. A nervous chuckle came from Emeka, then a full-blown mocking roar from his friends. The villagers, stunned, didn't know what to do. Amaka stood her ground. She had refused an elite. She had refused a fortune. She had, in the eyes of her people, lost her mind. Emeka's smirk vanished. He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "What did you say, girl?" "I said," Amaka repeated, her voice rising with a righteous fire, "that I am not an animal to be bought at the market." The humiliation was instant. Emeka's face turned from shock to pleading. This was a public rejection of the highest order. "Amaka, please," he stammered, his arrogance shattered. "Don't do this. Think of your family. Think of what I can give you." He gestured to the cars, the money still fluttering in the air. Amaka looked at the notes on the ground, then back at him, her eyes filled with a disgust that stung more than any slap. "I would rather starve than touch your money," she spat. "Everyone in this village knows the whispers. We know where this wealth comes from. Your money is filthy. It is stained with the blood of innocent girls, and I will not be the next one." That was it. She hadn't just refused him. She had spoken the unspeakable. She had insulted not just his wealth, but the very foundation of his father's power. Emeka's face turned to stone. The pleading was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous fury. He didn't say another word. He just turned, stormed back to his car, and the convoy sped away, leaving a storm of dust and absolute, terrifying silence in its wake. The fallout was immediate and brutal. As the senator's son and his convoy sped away in a cloud of dust and humiliation, her family turned on her.
Her uncles, their faces twisted with rage, disowned her on the spot. "You have shamed us," they screamed. "You are no longer our blood." Her father, he didn't scream. He just collapsed into a stool, his face buried in his hands, his body shaking with a kind of shame that was deeper than any anger. He had lost everything. Amaka was now an island, mocked by the village girls, shunned by the elders, and a ghost to her own family. But she had a reason, a secret reason. His name was Chike. Chike was the village palm wine tapper, a man of few words, with muscles carved from climbing trees and eyes that seemed to hold the quiet wisdom of the forest itself. He wore tattered shorts and owned nothing but a hut on the edge of the woods. To the village, he was nobody. To Amaka, he was everything. He saw the fire in her spirit, not as something to be owned, but as something to match. A week later, they eloped. Hand in hand, they fled the village, plunging into the darkness of the forest. With every step, Amaka felt the weight of her family's shame fall away, replaced by the thrilling, breathless hope of a new life. A life with the man she had chosen. They finally arrived at his hut. It was small, humble, but to her, it felt like a palace. She was safe. She was loved. She had made the right choice, or so she thought. This is where our story takes a turn. This is where the fairy tale ends and the nightmare begins. As Amaka stepped inside, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept over her skin. The air in the hut was thick, heavy with the scent of burnt herbs and something else, something metallic and wrong. In the corner of the hut, lit by a single flickering red candle, was a small, crude altar, and on it was a doll. Amaka froze. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't just any doll. It was an Nkpologu, a vessel for dark ritual magic. Everyone in the village knew of them, knew to fear them. They were used for binding, for cursing, for sacrifice. This one was large, carved from blood wood. It was distinctly female, and it was terrifyingly familiar. "Chike," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is this?" He didn't answer. He just picked up the doll. He then looked up, staring into her eyes, and for the first time, she saw no love in his eyes, only cold, chilling purpose. "A man must survive," Chike said, his voice empty. "The senator sends his regards." Amaka perfectly understood what he said. She wasn't stupid after all, just naive. As she realized now that Chike wasn't her savior. He was her shepherd, leading the lamb to slaughter. The senator had known about him all along, had paid him off. This was his true revenge. Her insult had changed the plan from marriage to sacrifice. Amaka turned to run, but just then she heard it. The crunch of tires on the dirt path. Headlights cut through the trees, flooding the small hut with a blinding sterile light. The car doors opened and closed with a silent, deadly finality. The men who approached the hut were not the senator's usual guards. They were shadows, moving with a purpose that promised only pain. Amaka was trapped. She looked at Chike, the man she had sacrificed everything for, and saw only a monster. He didn't even look at her. She watched in pure horror as Chike took a long, sharp, ritualistic pin. He looked from the door to her, a dead look in his eyes, and then he plunged the pin deep into the doll's wooden face, just below its left eye. Amaka screamed, but it was a scream she only felt. A searing, white-hot pain erupted on her own face in the exact same spot. She clutched her cheek, a cry catching in her throat, her body paralyzed by a force she couldn't comprehend.
When she pulled her hand away, her fingers were wet. She was crying blood. Her body was no longer her own. It was a puppet, and the senator held the strings. The senator himself stepped out of the darkness and into the vehicle light. He looked at Amaka, at her terrified, blood-tear-streaked face, and he smiled. A cold, victorious smile.
"You called my money filthy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You were right. It is. It requires a powerful source to keep it clean, a source that is pure, strong, and defiant." He looked at her, pinned in place by the dark magic, a living sacrifice. "You should have taken the money, girl. Now your spirit will fuel my family's fortune for the next generation." His revenge was complete. It wasn't just swift and silent, it was metaphysical. It was eternal. He wasn't just taking her life, he was consuming her very soul. They say the screams from that hut that night weren't human. They say the palm tree itself shook and the moon hid its face behind the clouds. No one ever saw Amaka again, and the village of Umuachala was broken by the silence that followed. The story in the village splintered into a dozen different legends. Some say the senator took her to the city, where she lives as his servant, a permanent reminder of her defiance. Others whisper that Chike completed his ritual, and that her spirit is now trapped in that small wooden door. Amaka, she became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered to girls who dare to have a voice, a warning that some prices are too high to pay, and some monsters are the ones we trust the most. So, what do you think? Was there any way Amaka could have escaped her fate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you appreciate stories that aren't afraid to look into the darkness, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next.